I was never told anything about my birth or my time in Korea. I can only go by my memory. I remember being in a compound, the classic Korean compound where you have a court, gates, and the Korean houses. And I remember playing in the dirt and an elderly lady and several other children. And I would say I had to be approximately 4 or 5. Prior to that, I don't remember anything about my existence. I don't remember anyone speaking to me, caressing me, or touching me. I remember entering the orphanage, and I don't quite remember the front of the orphanage. I just remember that it was a white building. I thought at that time that was the front. I remember a hallway, and it appeared to me there were several children in a lineup up against the wall, perhaps doing some type of registration. I remember being introduced to, I wouldn't say introduced per se, but placed in a room on that first floor. And there were stockings, Christmas stockings, somewhat stuck, lining up the ceiling, along the ceiling wall, right adjacent to the ceiling, or high enough. It wasn't something that we would touch. It was red mesh stockings, so I presumed it had to have been a Christmas time. I'm not certain. And I remember being with other children to a very limited extent, children of my age. I remember punishments for children who had perhaps wet the bed, that they would have to stand up in these vertically oriented windows, which I presume they were at least 4 feet tall. The windows faced southeastern. The reason I know that because the sun would come and we have sun exposure. I remember the nuns and their habits, and occasionally going to the cathedral, a large church, but most of the time we were in a smaller church. We had my age group, we had a room. It's a fairly large room, and we slept there. I don't recall any kind of games or any verbal communication, and she was actually a deaf nun. She was deaf, and I remember maybe a mama song, but she was a deaf nun, and she basically usually sat in the middle of the floor. And commands were usually given in claps and clicks. I didn't even know my name. I didn't even know if I had a name. No one called you by name. And I must have been clearly 5 to 6 years old by that time. I remember having the meals on the floor, the usual customary style, and meals would basically be probably like a brown broth with rice, and the food was brought up from the hillside. Actually, it was down lower and we were up higher. I remember some type of security watch, and we were on a high elevation in Seoul, Korea. And I don't ever recall going to school. I do remember a couple of people seem to have gone to school, and no one ever called my name. I never had a name that I remember. Never heard music. It's a pretty much sterile life. I don't really recall playing. However, in the spring, with the group of children in my group, we had pallets in the closet, and we will be awakened in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, lying up along the hallway. there wasn't much social interaction. And in the spring, it appeared as though they had a Korean dancers coming, Korean fan dancing. And that was my first time entering what I would call the second floor landing to the auditorium. And we probably sat on the floor. The soldiers came. And that particular day, perhaps it was a Sunday, a soldier asked me to come sit on his lap and gave me a package of Wrigley chewing gum. After that he was African American, Sergeant Cook, would come and visit me on a regular basis. I remember one of the caretakers mentioning to me that I was very fortunate and I was allowed to go traveling with him along the countryside on Sundays and then return somewhat late. And this went on for a little bit, and I guess he then processed so that I could go and stay with him. And I went to stay with him starting somewhere perhaps in November, sometime when the winter was coming, because the soldiers were receiving packages and everything, fruit cakes, and it was winter. And I stayed with him in the barracks, the Quonset barracks. He was a supply sergeant, so his office was on one side and I was on the other side. We had our living quarters on the other side, and he had Korean gentlemen taking care of me during the day. Even at that point, I wasn't speaking any language that I recall. There were no civilians there at the military installation that I knew. In fact, when someone showed up, I was asked to come out and meet them, or see a particular civilian. And then the following spring, we made arrangements for him to return to the United States. And I remember getting immunizations, ice cream. By that time, I had become probably a little bit more social. It was a very pleasant time of my life. And by June, we were off to the United States by air, went through Hawaii, went through the West Coast, traveled across to the East Coast, and then by train from, I presume, New York City down to Union Station. And that's when I met the family. And they had 4 children, 4 boys at that time. And I would have been the middle child. They lived on Stanton Road. For those who might be aware of D.C., we were living in housing projects and lived across the street from Stanton Elementary School. The housing projects were just recently torn down, and now they have different type of housing placed there. But it was basically a 3-bedroom housing project. So I perhaps was a little bit of an oddity for the community because it was predominantly, as far as I know, it was all African American. So when I went to school, I looked different from almost all of the kids. I was small. Although I didn't envision myself being small, but that wasn't a big issue for me. And she did not work. I don't recall her working. She was basically a housewife. For whatever reason, she didn't really, she wasn't that warm to me. And it may have to do with my appearances. And also the fact that I couldn't speak, but whatever. It was just, she wasn't very endearing. And I, again, lived in pretty much a life of isolation, which I felt very comfortable with. And I couldn't speak English, and I certainly couldn't speak Korean. And at that time, people, I mean, as a child, you really didn't have to speak. You didn't have to speak at all. In fact, when I went to school, I remember being trained to use or to speak using the phonetic sounds or phonics, and it was very difficult for me. I could read somewhat, or I could understand things mentally, but I could not articulate. By the time I got to junior high school and I went to an inner city junior high school, Douglas Junior High School, it became very clear to me that I didn't feel as though I was really learning very much in a formal education setting. I didn't have any type of social life, which was not anything that bothered me too much, but I just felt like I was out of rhythm. I wasn't in time with my peers. I rather enjoyed not saying anything to anyone. While we were there while I was attending Douglas Junior High School, we were living in another set of housing projects on Angel Place in Southeast. And it was what I would consider a little bit on the dismal side, although I didn't know any other life, too much of a life. But I started really looking at my environment a little bit closely. And I began to think that this is not the type of life that I would want for myself, simply because I couldn't see where it was going. And fortunately, a program came, people from a program called ABC, which is called the ABC, a Better Chance program, came, selected some students to take exams to afford them a college education or go to boarding school and then a college education. And from what I understand, it was supposed to be all free. And I was chosen, and that was the first time I felt a sense of being able to get out of that cage. It was like another life. It was validating that the world was beyond what I was living. And my mother didn't quite like the idea of me leaving. So, but anyway, the teachers convinced her that I could at least sit for the exams. I went to Gonzaga High School to take the particular exam. And I never forget that feeling. It was the first time I felt, oh my goodness, I felt kind of liberated. I felt like just the physical surroundings of that school was where I should be, or this is the kind of environment that I should be in. And it was on a Saturday. I took the exam and evidently had done adequately, I guess well enough for them to come back and select me to go to the program. But I was denied that opportunity. And during that period of my life, I spent most of the time going to school, coming home, doing housework, cleaning, doing a lot of chores. And I would say I probably didn't even weigh 90 pounds, but was responsible for the daily cooking. Didn't really know any other life. That was it. And didn't have an opinion about much of anything. I didn't watch television or read anything too intensely. I was afforded to have access to the library at school because I was considered a good student. And I enjoy reading magazines. And still couldn't speak that well. So By the time I left the junior high school and went to high school, I did everything I could to get out of that educational rut that I was in. I knew that there were problems because we would end up at the end of the school year barely getting through 1/3 of any textbooks. I couldn't really write. I don't think I had any kind of critical thinking skills of any significance. I couldn't verbalize much of anything. I attended Anacostia High School, and it was, to me, just an extension of the environment that I had left at Douglas Junior High School. I had a brother who was a few years older, with whom I kind of associated myself with, but he had his set of friends, and I had a pretty much sterile life, just basically going to school, going to work, and coming home. I had jobs like at Murphy's, Five and Dime, being a host, a waitress, and at McDonald's and things like that. And I immediately looked at the bulletin boards with the college applications and noticed it never said you had to have a high school diploma. It did say you had to have so many credits. So I kind of manipulated that. And at that time, you could go to summer school in the district school system without any kind of verification. I just figured out how to get on the bus. And for my mother, my family, they didn't really know what I was doing. As long as I brought home my summer job paycheck, I could go. I went to summer school just to get the credits. I don't think I learned that much, but I wanted to take English and my math courses. So by the time I became a junior, I could leave school and say I had my credits. So that's what I did. I went to, at that time it was called Western High School. I caught the bus up there. And at that time, the D.C. summer programs, I think they just figured all the kids were a little bad and not doing well in school. I just told them I had to go to summer school. No one questioned it. And I just attended summer school, came back to my job, and got the credits. And then when I went back to school, they allowed me to graduate a year earlier. So the principal was Mr. Lombardi. He told me that I could go across the stage with the rest, and I could be placed as far as class rankings with the senior people. I don't think some people appreciated that because I was in the top 5. And I also had to start looking at college applications. I was looking at them and applied. At that time, I thought I would like to go to the Seven Sister schools. And I just applied to as many schools as I could afford to do so. And many of the schools said I wasn't prepared, and they were absolutely right about it. But I wasn't gonna stop there. I'd rather say that I didn't take the course than to say I took the course and still not have learned anything. So fortunately, my brother had attended a college, Union College in Schenectady, New York, through the advisement of his English teacher, and he told me that they were looking for 100 women. So I applied, and I got in, and it was an all-boys school. So I was in that first class of 100 women. You know, the country was looking at the civil rights issues, and I think many schools were opening up their doors to minority students. There was a lot going on in the country at that time. But for me, it was like the first time I was in an environment that I felt good about. I felt like I belonged somewhere. But yet I really didn't, because for many of the students, I think it was an uncomfortable feeling having minorities, and the first thing is the negative impressions that you're not qualified to be here, you're not paying your way. And then I was with other African American students that I perhaps could not really relate to, because I was focused not so much on civil rights, I was more focused on obtaining an education to get out of my past. And I looked differently. I could not wear my hair in a bush, which was very popular at that time. Was a totally different complexion. I had features that they could not necessarily, had not seen actually, so. But I enjoyed it. It was a very difficult time for me. I worked on my communication skills. I loved the independence. It was the first time I had so much time to be able to read and not do a lot of manual work. I had to make decisions, but also it was the first time I realized that I really wasn't a citizen. I didn't know the implications of that. I wasn't a citizen. So I couldn't receive the scholarship funds. And the school let me know I wasn't a citizen. So that first summer, I made arrangements to try to get my citizenship. And that's what I did the first summer I was away. I was very fortunate to have attended Union. At that time, Union College, many of the students actually went on to postgraduate work, either in dentistry, perhaps they were in the engineering program, 5-year programs, psychology, but medicine and law. Probably at that time may have been 75% of the student bodies went on to pursue something. So I was in a good environment. I could not think of law because I couldn't speak that well. And I really had trouble remembering things. It always fascinated me that people could remember and cite case studies. I had not developed mentally in that fashion. But I loved biology. I love nature. I loved it. I enjoy walking. I enjoy walking through woods. Just anything involving nature in that fashion. I was not afraid of any animals. I probably very limited knowledge base, but I had anticipated medicine when I was in, actually, by the time of junior high school and high school, but I thought more in the lines of going into psychiatry or doing something, because I thought all I could do was just keep thinking. I couldn't really speak. And I figured, the patients would speak to you. You didn't have to say much to them. And I thought that would be the right thing for me to do. However, by the time I was through Union, or towards the end of Union, had to decide. I knew I was going to graduate school. I was going to do something. And medicine just seemed like a natural course because I thought that I wouldn't have to do too much talking. And at that time, as at many other schools, they had committees to determine whether you were fit to go into, or you could apply, whether they were going to support you. I didn't get a very good feeling from the gentleman. The professor that was running that program at that time was Dr. Roth. And I was probably considered a very weak student. And they weren't really encouraging. But that didn't fend me off because I really didn't think whatever they had to say to me was me at all. So I came home during the Christmas break, and I had applied to several schools. At that time, I had applied to Georgetown, but I didn't hear anything from them. So I had caught the bus before, because the summer school that I went to was right across the street from Georgetown Medical School. So I went and caught the bus. I knew how to get up there. And now, mind you, I didn't know how to drive. I didn't have a vehicle, but I caught the bus, and I knew it was the same bus. And I went to the counter, and I asked him, I said, I'm here, and could I please speak to someone on the committee, because I wouldn't have the resources to come back. I don't know for what reason the registrar did get someone, Dr. Hines Bowers. I spoke to him and told him I wanted to come. And before I left out of there, I pretty much had a confirmation from him that I would be accepted, and I did get my acceptance letter immediately. So I was glad to get the Georgetown acceptance. And so I was headed for there, and that's what I did. On a personal basis, I have 2 children, 2 daughters. And because of my past history with my education, patchy education, putting things together, I vowed that my children would never have to see that type of life. So I never spoke very much to them about any of the hardships or anything I felt negative about my past. But one of them, the youngest one, decided that she would go to boarding school. She really didn't know the story about me wanting to go to boarding school and that missed opportunity. So I told her to apply to 3, because I really, as a physician and radiologist, I was extremely busy, and I couldn't go visiting all these different places. And I said, apply to 3 schools. And one of the schools she applied to was Kent. And unbeknownst to me, one of my classmates, after finding out that my daughter had been accepted to Kent, reminded me that that was one of the schools that offered me a scholarship in Kent, Connecticut, through the ABC program. But I didn't really remember that, but she reminded me that that was the school. She was also one of the students that had been accepted. The oldest one ended up going to Union College. She enjoyed it. That's what she wanted to do. I didn't encourage it, but it was a good fit for her. So they are doing well. They will be graduating this year, 2014. One from graduate school in philosophy, and the other from undergraduate school. But because of my past history, I had no qualms that education was going to be a major focus for my children. Not only just formal education, but one of learning to read music and be able to do all the things, to travel, to be able to do beyond the confines of that particular community. Professionally, I was very fortunate. I went to Georgetown. I had worked with public health nurses when I was in high school. I did receive a scholarship to work. It was called the Junior Fellowship Program, which they hired students while they were in undergraduate school to come work for the federal government. And during that period, I met some public health nurses and thought that this was just right up my alley. I always wanted to be in the public health service, and unbeknownst to me, I applied when I was attending Georgetown, and then realized that they had a scholarship program. I applied for that, and I got accepted after my freshman year. So I went through the medical school under the public health scholarship program, and then served with the public health service in rural Delaware with the Native American Indians and minority community there, and was the physician that opened up the Mid-Sussex Health Center They didn't have a facility, did primary care. I had finished doing an internship with the Public Health Service in New Orleans. So that was a very wonderful period of my life. And again, lived in a rural area, pretty much isolated. Started driving. Actually, I learned how to drive in my senior year of medical school because we had to do rotations, to go on rotations, and got a vehicle and did that. So after the Public Health Service, when I was in Georgetown, I did not know what type of medicine that I would practice. I actually thought at one time that perhaps I would not practice medicine the way I envisioned. However, when I went to the radiology department, I realized that I enjoy that very much. So you couldn't stay in a public health service at that time and do radiology, so you had to get out. So I got out, and fortunately I got accepted over at Howard University Hospital to do radiology residency. And then they allowed me to stay on to do a fellowship in cross-sectional imaging. And I ended up getting a job. I just moved right up the road, about 2 miles up the road, and work with a private group at Providence Hospital. And they allowed me to be the medical director of an outpatient center. So, you know, it was just one thing just flowed into the next, and opportunities to have leadership skills. Even at Union College, I was a dorm counselor and participated in a lot of activities. So it was a good time. And through these activities and interactions, I learned how to speak, how to articulate, how to express myself. I could have thoughts, but I had trouble actually bringing forth or articulating to other people. The language skills was something that I just didn't feel comfortable with. I never learned phonics, and basically not really having anyone to communicate and tell you about. It was way into 7 years old. There's a long story how I found out that that was that particular site that I belonged to. I described the physical surroundings to a Korean family, and she told me, try Mingdong at the National Cathedral. And I did go up there, but of course I couldn't recognize anything. I was looking for a particular garden, and the orphanage is now a resting home for the nuns, and they had a gate there. And I described the interior of the building, and it was there that the nuns said this was your home. Because at first they said, no, I had never been there, because the documents that I had didn't support that particular site. And my names, that they're just different names, even from the Catholic Relief Society. I actually have been to the Archdiocese several times. I had asked the Catholic Church about my adoption. They said they didn't know anything about it. It was just, everything was in the dark about my past. But when I finally found a site and went there, no wonder, it was a French order. So the nuns there were speaking French and Korean, not English. So that's what, and now they have embraced me, and I'm considered one of their own. So I am involved with them, and have had the opportunity to take my friends there on my 60th birthday to visit the orphanage, the former orphanage. Reflecting back on my past and my life, I feel extremely grateful and blessed. I am very happy for all of there's nothing I would change, nothing. I am grateful for the neglect and the support that I may have received from anyone. I am very happy to have two daughters because that's my only bloodline right now. That's the only bloodline I have. They're very responsible adults. I am very happy that I was able to provide the type of education that they wanted without question, and to pay fully, to fund it fully without any debt, without any tremendous sacrifice. And I am very happy to have the profession that I have, to have the skill sets. I do women's imaging. I'm a radiologist, a diagnostic radiologist. I enjoy my occupation profession tremendously. I enjoy the people that I work with. I've had the opportunities to be in partnerships with major radiology groups. And I just basically love my life. And I love it because I don't feel like I'm in any kind of prison at all. I'm not restricted at all. It is just very bountiful, and I can just do whatever I really think that I will want to do. Whereas in the early part of my life, I really couldn't see past the immediate horizon, just didn't know how I was going to get out of things. I am so blessed that one day, Sergeant Cook, out of all the children in that orphanage, that he chose me because my understanding is, speaking with the nuns, that was an orphanage for really the undesirable children, because they had another orphanage that they sent the children to that could be adoptable, but I was not an adoptable child.